There is no manifesto, no architectural debate, no doctrine, no law, no planning, no ideology, no theory. There is only skyscraper.
Published in 1978, Delirious New York was written by Dutch architect, urban theorist, and co-founder of OMA, Rem Koolhaas. Architect of the CCTV Tower, House at Bordeaux, and Embassy of the Netherlands, Koolhaas has won the Pritzker Prize and been named one of Time magazine's top 100 most influential people. The book was written while New York was close to bankruptcy, had high rates of crime and poverty, and yet Koolhaas offers it as the Rosetta Stone of the 20th century. Ironically, a city in turmoil becomes the inspiration for a new archetypal metropolis. The premise behind Delirious New York is that the majority of manifestos are written but remain unrealised, while New York is a place of much realisation with no manifesto. Koolhaas aims to remedy this, proclaiming himself to be Manhattan's ghostwriter, writing the book as a retroactive manifesto for Manhattan. Koolhaas uses a variety of modes. He typically uses narration to describe the past and continues by drawing analogies from history. The book is ordered into blocks in homage to Manhattan's grid. The first of these blocks documents Coney Island's history from its discovery in 1609 through the development of several amusement parks in the late 1800s to their eventual destruction in the early 1900s. Whimsical and in some places bordering on the bizarre, his descriptions of these amusement parks are reminiscent of his 1972 thesis, Exodus or the Voluntary Prisoners of Architecture, in their surreal disconnect from reality. Koolhaas describes humpbacked railway cars able to overtake each other on a single track, and herds of mechanical horses that can be ridden across the island, creating an energetic picture foreshadowing the city New York would become. Anecdotes are supported throughout by cheerful archival photos and illustrations. However, in some places the text takes on a more sinister tone. At one point, Koolhaas details how ships were lured off course by an amusement park's decorative beacon to be wrecked, thereby adding to the chaos. This is done so with Machiavellian detachment. Koolhaas describes it as a masterstroke. His writing style, presumably informed by his years as a journalist, could be seen as sensationalist. Extreme positions are taken, which inevitably lead to contradiction. In Rem's own words, it is not possible to live in this age if you don't have a sense of many contradictory forces. Koolhaas frequently uses loaded words, personifying and sexualizing objects to add weight to his writing. A sphere is described as promiscuous, while a bridge consummates the relationship between Manhattan and Coney Island. Metaphors effortlessly animate the text. In one instance, Koolhaas likens the success of Manhattan to an elevator with invisible safety stays. Should the main cable be severed, the resultant triumph is not in the following event, but in the distinct lack of failure. Manhattan is therefore said to be a success because it is the product of many unrealized failures. Though this history could be seen as superficial, simply documenting New York's eccentricities, Koolhaas justifies it, drawing an analogy between the book and a blueprint. While neither predicts the nuances of realization, they describe an ideal state. Koolhaas is describing a theoretical New York.
Koolhaas elaborately chronicles the birth of the Manhattan skyscraper and how the promise and potential of the New York skyscraper arose from the merging of three urbanistic breakthroughs into a glorious whole. A 1909 theorem describes the skyscraper as a utopian device for the production of unlimited numbers of sites on a single location, enabled by the union of the lift and steel frame to allow a site to be repeated ad infinitum. However, each story is disconnected and fractures the life inside the building, which conflicts with the idea that they all add up to a single entity. Another architectural disconnection is present, an architectural lobotomy, where the facade is separated from the ever-increasing interior as the building soars ever higher. The monument of the 20th century is the auto monument, and its purest manifestation is the skyscraper, a monument to itself, achieving this through its sheer volume. Just as Koolhaas describes the skyscraper as the sum of its disjointed floors, he draws the analogy of Manhattan as a metropolitan archipelago of 2,028 blocks, united by the grid. Each block strives to be a city within a city and becomes a self-contained enclave of the irresistible synthetic, a usage of fantastic technology to pursue its private architectural adventure. One of the theories expressed is that of Manhattanism, an ideology whereby contradictory positions fueled by hyperdensity coexist. Koolhaas offers the relationship between needle and sphere as an example of this. They are polar opposites in terms of volume and impact, but Manhattan's history can be considered a dialogue between the two, with each trying to become the other. Manhattanism had been generated by the city as its own metropolitan urbanism, a culture of congestion. Koolhaas describes the culture of congestion as the culture of the 20th century and as the real enterprise of Manhattan's architects. Comparing and contrasting the roles of many skyscraper theorists, the house and village of the 1916 zoning law, Hugh Ferris's Buildings Like Mountains, and Corbett's Manhattan as a very modernized Venice, are all discussed to establish that the exploitation of congestion itself is the paradigm for Manhattan's architecture. Furthermore, Koolhaas goes on to note the importance of the Empire State Building, as it absorbed the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and thus its history which stood on its site. And so in this way, destruction becomes another word for preservation and epitomizes the culture of congestion.
Koolhaas proposes that a representative is required to bond the urbanistic doctrine of Manhattanism. He is a man with the willpower and strength of mind of a man named Raymond Hood. Hood is one of the architects responsible for John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s love child, known as the RCA Building, the Radio City, the new Babylonian ideal that is the Rockefeller Center. Hood is described as a schizophrenic architect who is comfortable with designing a Central Methodist Episcopal Church integrated with a YMCA, apartments, a hotel complex, even including the largest garage in Christendom. This paradox is derived from and fuels Manhattanism. Eventually Hood becomes instrumental in this ideal to the point that it is obvious for him to be included in the design for the Rockefeller Center. Alternatively, Koolhaas describes the design of the Rockefeller Center as a masterpiece without a genius. Architecture by committee is what makes this building unique, and as Koolhaas would like us to believe, a blueprint of how real functional buildings should be created. There is this underlying idea that each building in Manhattan is a building unto itself, bearing no relation or precedence to the buildings about it. Thus the buildings of Manhattan should be designed not by architects as such, but building planners, in a similar way that city design is governed by city planners. This philosophy strikes true to the architecture by committee that is the Rockefeller Center. It is only when you step back and look that you see the true city, where conflicting buildings merge into one single entity. This monolith is a building that almost suffers from over-design. It was the obsession of the greatest minds of the city at a time when very few buildings were in fact being constructed. It was the Great Crash of 1929. The Rockefeller saw many forms in its design. The building was massed in hundreds of different shapes. Postcards were distributed, advertising the new build, but the artist knew not what it would look like, since the design changed so much, so frequently. This style of designing could be said to inform Koolhaas's own work with OMA. In their building design, they perform massing exercises, exploring the possible forms that the building could take. At the end of this process, there are multitudes of rejected forms.
The book can be read on more than one level. A quick skim will offer a brief history of New York, while Koolhaas's analyses provide a deeper message about society and bear rereading. The book is a catalyst for conversation, as it instigates people to think about its contents. Even when Koolhaas makes exaggerated statements that are seemingly false, he could be seen as playing devil's advocate, being so provocative that the reader becomes aware that the very opposite is true. The influence of Delirious New York is hard to gauge, considering many of Koolhaas's postulations are of an abstract nature. A question that could arise from this text could be, from the point the book was published, how much has and will it have an influence on the evolution of urban design?